After losing their third conference finals in the past 6 years, the Boston Celtics find themselves in a really interesting situation. What do you do with Jaylen Brown? A question that seemed really easy before the playoffs is now arguably the biggest talking point of the offseason, or is going to be the biggest talking point of the offseason. And although Boston has floated around the idea of trading Brown before, the market certainly isn't what it was when they were doing that. So in today's video, I want to break down the situation that Boston finds themselves in, and why I personally think it makes sense to trade Jaylen Brown, as difficult as that may be. So let's start with that last comment, why I think it makes sense to trade Jaylen Brown. Now, I'm not saying that no matter what, Boston should look to move him this offseason and get him off the roster no matter what, but if you weren't already aware, Jaylen Brown is about to get a max contract, or is eligible for a max contract, and is definitely going to ask for one, which is going to be around $59 million a year for the next 5 years. It would actually, that contract would make him currently the highest paid player in the NBA. But I don't know how much that specific detail matters, considering Bradley Beal is currently the second highest paid player in the NBA. I think the fact that Jaylen Brown is going to be the highest paid player in the NBA shouldn't stop the Celtics from maxing him. What should potentially stop the Celtics from maxing him is the new CBA. If you aren't aware, the new CBA is going to make life miserable for the Celtics if they re-sign Jaylen Brown to this max. It's not even a question that they're going to max Tatum, so having both him and Brown under your salary cap is going to take up roughly 3/4 of it. Before these new CBA changes, this would still be a lot to manage, but now under them, it's borderline impossible. So I'm taking this from a Celtics blog article that I'll link below, but here's everything Boston won't be able to do if they decide to keep in max Brown, and most likely in the process cross the second tax apron, which is really what matters here. The second line is the big problem. So if the Celtics do decide to max Brown and inevitably do cross that second tax apron, which they'll definitely need to build the contender around Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, the Celtics can't take back any more salary than they send down to trade. This is arguably, in my opinion, like the least damaging. It will like make some trades either not possible or more difficult, but I don't think this is going to be the end of the world for them. It is. You do need to note, I see this here, essentially, if you're going to get the other team to take on more money, you usually do also have to give up more assets. So it does hurt Boston, but I really think this is the lightest of the punishments. This is, however, the next one is where it really gets bad. They lose their mid-level exception. If you've spent a lot of time around the NBA or know a lot about like NBA contracts or just any general idea about like free agency, you probably know how important the mid-level exception is. A lot of contenders build their team and then get a lot of their like important role players through the mid-level exception, because it's just a nice chunk of money to be able to spend on role players and filling out the rest of your roster with talented players. They're just going to completely lose that. They'll only be able to use minimum contracts when they're past the second tax apron, which they'll still be able to get quality players, but the pool is a lot worse than if you had the mid-level, significantly worse. I think this honestly might be the most damaging, considering a big thing that Boston has prided themselves on is just the depth around the Jays. Boston has been able to go so deep this season, and even if that wasn't really the case or didn't help them as much as they wanted in the playoffs, it's a big thing for Boston. It was a big thing for them, I think, last year too. So yeah, losing the mid-level exception would really hurt how they construct these teams around the Jays. Next one kind of goes hand in hand with the last one. They cannot sign buyout guys. So think of Reggie Jackson, Blake Griffin, Goran Dragic. Unless those guys were already getting paid the minimum, which they never really are, they cannot sign them. And while that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, considering that all those guys I just listed were in the playoffs for a while and really didn't get a lot of playing time anyways, it still hurts. It's another like avenue to sign players that Boston is losing out on. And even then, we aren't very like far removed from there being good players in the buyout market. It happens. It wasn't that long ago that Jeff Green was a buyout player for the Houston Rockets. So yeah, this one does hurt. I don't think as much as the mid-level, but I think all of these hurt, and this one definitely does. And then the next one, this one actually, I didn't really realize. I was pretty aware of these, or at least the idea of these. I wasn't aware of how it would affect their picks. Boston won't be able to trade their picks 7 years out. It essentially limits their flexibility when it comes to trades. It's also like the author of this article writes, it's a pretty minor hurdle, but combined with everything else, it's just more reduced flexibility. And what really makes this bad is if they do continue to cross that tax spread, which once again they will need to build a contending team around those two max players, that first round pick automatically becomes the 30th pick in that draft no matter what, which that's terrible. That's like crazy town banana pants to me, but that's terrible. And I really don't know how you deal with that if you're Boston. It could not matter at all. Jason Tatum is 25, so if he's still playing then for the Celtics, it'd be 32 then. He could still be in his prime. But it really does suck. It is just adding on to everything else that sucks. So all this should make it pretty clear why Boston is interested in should be interested in trading Jaylen Brown. The hard part, which is it's a lot harder to make a Jaylen Brown trade than it was last season. Last offseason, obviously there was Kevin Durant. That was the guy to go for if you were going to make a Jaylen Brown trade. But I think there are still potential avenues. But like I keep saying, it's just not the same as it was last year. So the first and maybe most unrealistic option here is Jaylen Brown, Peyton Pritchard, salary filler, and a mother load of picks for Damian Lillard. Now, this is contingent on both Portland and Dame wanting to trade or being ready for a trade, which I think pretty recently Dame made pretty clear that it isn't going to happen, or it might. He's being pretty cryptic, but we've seen this before, and it's unlikely. But if it is possible, I think this is the best trade and the closest you could get to getting a Kevin Durant level player. I think Lillard addresses a lot of the issues that Boston has and had this playoffs, which I've even talked about from a basketball perspective, like the on the court perspective, why it would make sense to trade Brown. But the simple of it is Boston needs more playmaking. They need in both of creating shots for others and creating shots for themselves. Tatum is good and Smart verges on being good at times, but they need a consistent playmaker, and I think it was clear that Brown wasn't that, and he can't be that for them, at least not right now. I think they also need a vocal leader. I think they need a vocal leader who's also one of their on-court leaders. Smart and Horford are good, but I think it was through the wire, Pierre through the wire mentioned, it helps when your vocal leader is also the guy who's taking that last shot. The last shot cannot continue to go into Marcus Smart over the Jays, and Damian Lillard wouldn't let that be the case. He would demand the last shot. Although Dame's a little bit older, I think he's coming off arguably his best season, and I think how great of a fit he is with Boston means those 2 to 3 years where he's still in his prime, I probably could realistically see Boston being the favorite out east. I don't think Portland has indicated anything that says they want to trade Damian Lillard, but if they do, this is the best option available. A more realistic trade, but one I'm still not actually sold on the viability of it happening, is Jaylen Brown for Tyus Jones, Luke Kennard, and Desmond Bane. I think this would actually be a really good trade for Boston, because not only do you get a lot of flexibility, you get answers to your playmaking problem, and you get just really talented players. Tyus Jones is a really great point guard, one of the best, role player point guards, even better at times in the NBA. And I don't think he necessarily solves your playmaking problem, but he makes it a lot better, and that's where you hope someone like Tatum and Smart can step up a little bit more. I think Jones is a significant upgrade in that department, as well as, like I've said, this just offers them a lot of flexibility. Bane is not going to be on nearly as high. He's going to get max, but not nearly as much as Brown. I think it'll be roughly $30 million, which is almost half the salary. If it even is that, it'll be almost half the salary of Jaylen Brown. which that makes a significant difference. And Luke Kennard can easily be dumped. So I think I could really see why Boston would do this, and why if I was Boston, I'd be interested in this. But I don't know how much of an upgrade Memphis sees Brown as, considering the last postseason. And I think this is a lot to ask them to give up. But who knows? Maybe they're feeling like they got to do something. Maybe they're unsure about what the roster's looking like next year and think that Brown could kind of help stabilize that. I don't know. Maybe there's a world where this happens. I think this is honestly the biggest win-win trade on this list, but I also could really see a world where it doesn't happen. A trade that I think is like sneakily realistic and like sneakily possible is just a Cat for Brown swap. I think you could see why both teams would be interested in this. Brown sort of struggled as a second option this season, but I think his fit with Anthony Edwards is maybe better than Towns, especially because it clears up a bit more space down low consistently for Edwards. I also think this is arguably just the best player you get straight up in a trade for Karl-Anthony Towns. I think Jaylen Brown is great value, great return for him, and I think his defense would help. I just think there's reasons Minnesota would be interested in this, a lot of reasons. As well as if you're Boston, I could definitely see why you'd be interested. You've made the two big man lineup work with Horford and Williams, and Towns is the best three-point shooting big man of all time, so you could really slide him in there easily. I don't think Boston does this, however, because I don't think it really solves any of the issues they actually had. Sure, Towns would possibly fit with Boston, but he doesn't solve the playmaking issue or the vocal leader issue. I think it would make more sense possibly to keep Jaylen Brown than to do this, but also I think there's a world where it makes sense to do this. Maybe now that, it happened after I wrote the script, but now that Chris Paul's available, maybe you do this trade and you really pray that Chris Paul is willing to take a little bit of money to help your playmaking. Then that crazy hypothetical world where both of these things happen, then I could see Boston winning. But just Towns for Brown, I could see that making this roster worse or just the same. I don't think it's a big enough upgrade to be something Boston is truthfully interested in. And the last trade to me is unrealistic, not from the perspective of the Damian Lillard trade, but from the perspective of, I really think Boston only makes this trade if they're backed into a corner, if they feel like we have to trade Jaylen Brown, he wants out. And it's honestly not bad value. I think it would be Brown and Pritchard to the Hawks for Bogdanovich and DeJounte Murray. And I think if you're Atlanta, first of all, this is a no-brainer. Brown is an upgrade on the DeJounte Murray trade, which I'm not calling a failure, but it's certainly not been as successful as you'd want. And I think it'd be a lot easier to see Atlanta as like a perennial playoff team if you have Jaylen Brown right next to Trae Young. So I think if you're Atlanta, this is a no-brainer. If you're Boston, I think there are a few reasons you would do this trade. I think the first is Bogdanovich is a really good three-point shooter. He's a 40% three-point shooter, and Boston could really use that. And he's just another good rotation player. There's a little bit more flexibility. You break up Jaylen Brown's ginormous contract into two smaller ones to still pretty equal in value, but it's a lot easier to move those and to work around those contracts than would be Jaylen Brown's max. And then I've been critical of DeJounte Murray on this channel in the past, but I want to make it very clear that I am a fan of DeJounte Murray and his game and what specifically he was doing last year in San Antonio. And I think you could really hopefully replicate that with him being being the primary ball handler again. And you're hoping he replicates that, but either way, even if he is a 20-6 guy again, that fits pretty well. His defense is good. The shooting is certainly not what you would want, which is why I think Boston would look at this and be like, no. I think you also look at this and say, are we going from trading Jaylen Brown for Kevin Durant to trading Jaylen Brown for DeJounte Murray? I think he maybe is on name alone, just not big enough for Boston to want to do this, but who knows? I actually think this could hypothetically work, and I think this is another interesting trade. So after all of that, though, I think it's pretty clear, while it makes sense for Boston to trade Brown, it's a lot easier said than done. The trade, like I said, was for Kevin Durant, and like everybody said, it was to trade for Kevin Durant if you were going to move Brown. So what's the ceiling, though? If you are Boston and you're not going to move Brown, you're going to keep him on the roster. What is this team's ceiling? I think, honestly, it's hard to look at a team that was in the NBA Finals last year. They were in the conference finals this year, Game 7 of the conference finals this year. And I think it's hard to look at them and say that they won't be able to replicate that success. I think time is ticking a bit more than people think. Like I said, with the new CBA, it's going to be really hard to build a deep contending team around the Jays than it is right now. It's certainly not impossible, but I really feel like your window is like 2 to 3 years before this roster on Tatum and Brown is just too expensive to keep around. And I think if your window's already that limited, and the option is there, I don't know why you wouldn't pull the trigger for a Damian Lillard trade or a player like Damian Lillard. And that's pretty much the gist of it. I honestly am not sure what exactly Boston can do. Like I said, I think Boston missed the window with the KD trade. And getting a player of that caliber, even a Damian Lillard player, is pretty much near impossible, if not just impossible now. And even though it may not be the best for all parties involved, I think the most likely scenario is that Brown starts the next season on Boston. I think the market just won't be there. And you could, don't get me wrong, you could be in a lot worse situation than having to max your 26-year-old all-NBA caliber star. And this team has been to an NBA Finals and a bunch of conference finals, so it's not hard to see a world where they do that again. But like I made clear, that path has a lot more limit of a timeline than you expect from a team constructed around two 25 and 26-year-old stars. A lot of what makes these teams around Tatum and Brown so good wouldn't be possible. So yeah, as the title of this video says, I think Boston has a big problem, and I think it's a lot more complicated than Jaylen Brown just having a bad series or struggling to dribble. And I personally don't know how you deal with it. You're really praying someone big hits the trade market soon. Maybe now that CP3 is available, you do that cat thing. I don't know. I just really think there isn't a clear answer to Boston's problems. I took about 2 months off right as the playoffs started to finish up school and work on some other stuff, but I'm back now and I have a few ideas. This new format that I've clearly taken a bit from Spawn Hour, Mogul Mail, and Kenny Beecham. It's just gonna be me like rebranding and restarting Hoops Talk Weekly, where I can just talk like less analytically about stuff. Not less analytically, but like I won't be assembling as many graphs or stats. I just want to be able to like talk about something in the NBA and get my thoughts to you guys really quick. I'm definitely still gonna be making videos like my Evan Mobley, Jalen Brunson, Benedict Mather ones. I'm still going to be making deep dive videos on players and teams. This is just, I think, a way for me to be able to talk to you guys once a week about basketball and give more of, I think, my opinion. I try and stay, I guess it's impossible to be unbiased. I'm really rambling now, but this is just going to be more personal of a video. Anyways, that's all. Rant over. Thank you guys. As always, thank you guys for watching. And I'll hopefully see you guys next week.